Okay, hi everyone. This lesson is going to be about framework. Today's lesson is going to be a very brief introduction to framework. The sort of framework I'm going to talk about is kind of applicable to every format of debate that there is, especially in regards to like policy, public forum, Lincoln Douglas, that sort of thing. And it can kind of serve as a gateway. In later videos, some of the other coaches will be going into more advanced types of frameworks specific to each format of debate. Like a Lincoln Douglas framework is going to be very different than a policy debate framework. A public forum framework is going to be more basic and less sophisticated than other formats of debates frameworks, simply because look at the speech time. It's 4 minutes. So what I'm going to talk about is like, what is framework? Why do we read framework in debate, and how you can write a good framework in your case. So framework. Framework is kind of like arguing about the rules of the debate. Actually, you have certain norms in debate, and there's certain like rules to debate. But honestly, those rules don't really exist. Like in policy debate, the affirmative side is supposed to advocate a plan for the United States federal government, but there have been a lot of national champions who have had a lot of success not defending the resolution, but in fact criticizing it, or taking a different approach to the resolution, and that sort of thing. In the end of the debate, there's a ballot, and there's like a roll of the ballot. The ballot that the judges are handed simply says, the best debating was done by blank, but how do they determine the best debating, and how do you kind of like establish like the rules and like the terminology and the sort of ground that people have in debate? So why do we read framework? Like the first reason we read framework is that it keeps the round like predictable, right? We all have biases. We all have our own motivations. We tend to value like different things over other things. And so the first thing that framework does is a judge in debate is supposed to be a blank slate. And framework kind of like establishes what are some of the important arguments, what are the main issues in a debate, what are sort of the things we can talk about. So framework does two things. Specifically for public forum debate, a lot of this is going to be geared towards public forum debaters, and then in later videos, we will talk a little bit more about policy specific framework, Lincoln Douglas specific framework, et cetera, et cetera. But in public forum, framework does two things. The first thing it does is it establishes like definitions. Now, one thing that really annoys me when I judge a public forum round is you only have like a 4-minute constructive speech. And if you spend, and some kids will define like every single word in the resolution, and then it's like, okay, well, you have 2 minutes to read your contentions. It's only important to establish definitions of terminology that could be like controversial, or something that can help you like establish or limit what certain things can be talked about. And the second thing that a framework can do is sets a criteria for how the judge should pick a winner, or how they should evaluate the winner of the topic. So another thing that framework can do is it can eliminate squirreling. Squirreling is basically, sometimes people will try to be really clever and kind of like, I guess, make the debate derailed by playing tricks with words. And so another thing you can do with like framework is to prevent squirreling from happening. Like, let's say we have a debate about euthanasia, and one side gets up and they talk about the right to die, suffering is bad, potential benefits of making it legalized is happening already. In fact, our national topic in China last year was about physician-assisted suicide. And so that got brought up, right? But if someone gets up and is like, hey, the topic says euthanasia should be legal. How can you make Chinese and Korean kids and Japanese kids illegal? Because euthanasia sounds exactly like youth in Asia, as you can see in the slide next to me. So one thing that we need to make sure that we happen is that we have terms that we can agree on to establish what we're debating about, to prevent the debate being completely derailed. I remember one of my friends was going to a BP tournament, and it was like, the house regrets achieving goals. Well, if you're playing soccer and you don't have goals, how are you going to win the soccer game? Because you have to score a goal to win. How do you pick a winner, right? So these sort of things come up sometimes in debate rounds where people will try to play tricks with the words, because the English language has a lot of words that mean different things. Like, this table's hard, but so is math. Okay, so before we talk about how to structure framework, we should talk about different types of resolutions that you will come across in debates. The first is what we call a policy resolution. And if you do policy debate, all of your resolutions are going to be policy resolutions. And then you will see policy resolutions pop up in public forum, as well as sometimes in Lincoln Douglas, though they may be worded a little bit differently than a policy, than what you would see in cross-examination debate. So policy is a resolution on whether an organization such as, the United States federal government, the United Nations, the European Union, a specific country, groups of countries, a certain NATO, countries in general, developing countries, though I don't really like the term developing countries, kind of like a colonialist, not cool term, whether they should take some sort of action. The United States should establish a space colony. The United Nations should ban the use of drone warfare. States should eliminate the use of nuclear weapons. These compare about whether we should take an action, and the pro says we should do something, and the con defends the status quo. Though in policy debate, there's a ton of things that the negative side can do. But in general, it's about whether the pro has to advocate for a specific course of action. It's a very consequentialist debate. It's looking at the consequences of actions, the implications of certain policies, the reasoning behind it, that sort of thing. Now, a truth-testing debate is kind of one of the more rare types. You will see truth-testing topics a lot of times in world schools debate, parliamentary debate, as well as sometimes in public forum. In fact, you could argue that the current nationals topic, as I'm speaking right now, the national tournament will be starting very soon as this video is being recorded. And that topic for public forum is, in the United States, social media is beneficial for democratic values. And so the pro proves that it's beneficial for democratic values. The con shows it's not beneficial for democratic values, right? And so a lot of that, or another example would be regional trade blocs have improved political stability, or economic globalization is a threat to a national interest of a country. So the burden of the pro side is to prove that the statement's true, and the con side proves it's not true. Now, where the debate really gets into, which I'll talk about later, is what exactly is a democratic value, and what exactly it doesn't mean to be benefiting or harming these sort of things. Okay, the last is a value debate. You see value resolutions primarily in Lincoln Douglas debate, though I said now, more recently, in the past 10 or so years, Lincoln Douglas has kind of evolved into having more of an opening into a policy resolution. So a value debate kind of focuses on a particular ideal or a particular interpretation of what is just or what is correct. It's more heavily rooted in philosophy or like conflicting values, right? So like the criminal justice system ought to prioritize rehabilitation over retribution. It's more about how the world should be. I shouldn't say the word should, because should usually implies a policy action, but how the world ought to be. Like what a good, just world should be like. So in a democracy, voting ought to be compulsory. The spirit of the law should be prioritized over the letter of the law. Developed countries have a moral obligation to mitigate the effects of climate change. These sort of resolutions you've seen emerge and you can talk about, right? So you usually see like value debates mostly in Lincoln Douglas, but public forum, parliamentary, other formats of debate can include, any mix of these resolutions throughout the year when the topic changes. So what's the point of debating something like democratic values or like what justice? I think we can all agree that certain values are good, like justice or morality. But one thing you want to provide is a way for the judge to measure what is a just action, right? Like looking about like something like we consider, like let's say, for example, honor. Like this action is honorable. Well, a lot of people have different beliefs about what is correctly justice or what is correctly morality. So in a criminal justice topic, rehabilitation and retribution are two ways to, look at how to achieve justice when someone's been wronged. And one side may argue, like the retribution side could look at, okay, well, the best way to achieve justice is, giving priority to the victims of crimes. Whereas another person could say the best way to achieve justice is through rehabilitating criminals by preventing future crime, like that sort of thing. And there's a lot into this. I could spend an hour video into like how to write a criterion. So we'll go into that more into future videos. But in a truth testing topic or a value topic, it's really important that you give the judge some way to measure like what are the most important issues here. Like when we're focusing on justice, how do I determine who is more just? Or in a topic about like democratic values, what specific democratic values are more important? Is it participation in elections? Is it bipartisanship in America, like Democrats and Republicans working together? Is it about polarization? These sort of things. Fair and free elections. Participation in the civic sphere. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of look into interpreting this topic. And so I guess, you could call it criteria. You could also, if it's a truth testing topic, you could call it like an interpretation of what the resolution means. And that kind of gets into, you don't want to spend too much time debating things, but you want to be able to establish a case that can help the judge understand your story that you're telling. And it can set you up in the later debates where you have a clear thesis combined with contentions that allow you to tell a story in a cohesive manner. Okay, so I've talked a lot so far, so I'm going to cut this video into two parts. So I hope you really enjoyed this. In the next part, I'm going to talk a little bit about utilitarian framework versus like a deontology, rules-based, categorical imperative framework.